There are a few games that are known by their scores, but what if one was reversed? Let's step into the alternate history portal and change the result of 13-9 in the 2007 Backyard Brawl and see how that affects the college football landscape. It's December 1st, 2007, and we're at Mountaineer Field at Milan-Pusker Stadium for a Big East rivalry matchup. At home, the West Virginia Mountaineers are one of the nation's best, clocking in at number 2 overall in the then definitive BCS rankings. On the other sideline are the unranked and frankly bad University of Pittsburgh Panthers. Only the Panthers weren't bad that fateful night in Morgantown. In fact, they were pretty good. In the year of the upset, Pitt pulled off one of the final major ones, downing the number 2 Mountaineers by 13-9. But what if that wasn't so? It's time to hit the historical portal.
Winning a national championship depends on how a team rates in the polls, one by sports writers, one by coaches. Occasionally, other outside influences intervene.
Pat White wasn't the biggest or most talented passer in the nation, but he had a specific role in the zone read system pioneered by West Virginia head coach Rich Rodriguez. He's the general, the glue, the engine that makes one of the nation's top offenses go. What happens when you take away the engine? We find out in real life with 5 minutes and 12 seconds to go in the second quarter when White injures his hand on a no-gain rush on 2nd and 6 from the Pittsburgh 45-yard line. In steps Jarrett Brown, and the rest, while in no way Brown's fault, is history. But not today. Today, White goes down and returns to the huddle for the next play. White orchestrates the same touchdown drive that Brown did to bring the Mountaineers up 7-0 in the Backyard Brawl rivalry game. Pittsburgh ekes out a field goal before the half and then responds with a 5-minute touchdown drive to open up the second half and claim a 10-7 lead. But the offense doesn't falter this time. No, they do West Virginia things. White, explosive tailback Steve Slayton, power running Noel Devine, and fullback Owen Schmidt continued the role they found and scored another touchdown, taking a 14-10 lead. From there, West Virginia is able to sneak past with a narrow yet ugly 17-13 win. The 11-1 Mountaineers hang on to win the game and claim the number 1 spot after Missouri is defeated 38-17 by number 9 Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. Without a Big East title game, the Backyard Brawl was played during conference championship week. The Mountaineers claim the bulk of the first place votes and take the top slot and claim a spot in the BCS national title game. Rodriguez's Mountaineers are going to travel to New Orleans, Louisiana for the BCS national championship showdown against Ohio State. The Buckeyes claim the number 2 spot after a similarly ugly 14-3 win in the game behind two touchdown rushes by Chris Beanie Wells against Michigan. This BCS national championship, the stages are all but set for a West Virginia coronation. The Mountaineers have the best rushing offense this side of the service academies, even better than Army's. But Ohio State has the nation's best scoring defense. It's a classic battle of unstoppable force against immovable objects. But West Virginia also has a stout defense, one that ranks 8th in the nation in scoring defense. With Ohio State's 41st ranked scoring offense, the Beanie Wells-led Buckeyes suffer the same fate they did in real life against LSU and can't hang with the Mountaineers. West Virginia has done it. The crystal ball is coming to Morgantown. The 2007 Backyard Brawl was perhaps the most famous game of this year of the upset. Well, maybe not as famous as Appalachian State's blocked field goal to win in the Big House to open the season and start off the Big Ten Network era, but that game was more famous for sheer nonsense. It was a ridiculous outcome, one that only got more ridiculous as the years of the upset unfolded. The 2007 Backyard Brawl didn't suffer that same fate. No, the Backyard Brawl changed football history. Our story is going to take us back to Ann Arbor, where the Michigan Wolverines have had it up to here with their head coach Lloyd Carr, who can't beat Ohio State and lost to Appalachian State in Ann Arbor. Carr announces his retirement 2 days after the loss to Ohio State, and Michigan is on the hunt for a head coach. The search that would follow is one of many twists and turns that cause Michigan's fans' blood pressures to rise. In real life, the messy search ends with West Virginia's Rich Rodriguez heading over to Ann Arbor. Not here, because Rodriguez proved to everyone that his system works and he can win in Morgantown. So he stays. Michigan comes calling, and Rodriguez says thanks, but no thanks. So where does Michigan turn? Their coaching search landed a bunch of names that you probably know. Kirk Ferentz at Iowa was in consideration until he wasn't. Les Miles flirted with and ended up declining the job with the Tigers fresh off a national championship win in the real timeline. The coach of upstart Cincinnati was given consideration. His name? Brian Kelly. Rutgers' Greg Schiano turned down the job. In this scenario, with West Virginia winning a national title, Miles isn't preparing for the national title game and has some extra time on his hands. I hear Ann Arbor's nice that time of year. Miles makes the trip and agrees, liking the fit of the maize and blue and the sound of hail to the victors. He's announced as the next Michigan head coach. LSU, losing Les Miles, turns to a familiar face lots sooner than they do in our timeline and poach Brian Kelly from Cincinnati. Cincinnati can turn to someone like, Kevin Sumlin. He was hired by Conference USA Houston at the time, so he'd be in Cincinnati's wheelhouse. As for Rodriguez, how's a hefty pay raise after Michigan comes calling sound? After all, he is a West Virginia alum. Back in Morgantown, Rodriguez sits in his office and surveys the roster ahead of a matchup against FCS Villanova. He has his entire staff back because he didn't poach them for Michigan. He also has his guys back. Pat White, back. Noel Devine, back. Steve Slayton is off to the NFL as a third-round selection of the Houston Texans, but Devine is more than ready to take the mantle from Slayton. The Mountaineers enter the season as defending national champions and open up the season ranked 5th in the AP poll behind Georgia, Ohio State, USC, and Florida. Rodriguez, White, and company have a light start to the slate with battles against Villanova, an FCS team, and East Carolina. They run through Villanova without breaking sweat, but a quality ECU team gives them fits. West Virginia still survives. They travel to Boulder to take on an average Colorado team and run through them too. Marshall provides little to no challenge for the white-led Mountaineers, and West Virginia climbs the rankings up to number 2 behind Mark Sanchez's USC. Big East play commences with a battle against a solid Rutgers program led by Michigan sprinting Greg Schiano. Despite the best efforts of Schiano and the Scarlet Knights defense, White and Devine tear through them and Mountaineers get the win. In fact, that's how most of the season goes. Even in real life, the Mountaineers didn't slip up much in conference play aside from losses to Cincinnati and Pittsburgh in the next Backyard Brawl. Let's assume one of those is flipped, the overtime loss to Cincinnati. Because of how close that margin is, I feel like Rodriguez on the sideline with a handle on how his team would play is enough to take the lead. Pair that with Kevin Sumlin leading the Bearcats instead of Brian Kelly, and that's enough to sway the result. But that does leave us in a heartbreaking loss to the Backyard Brawl to none other than Pitt. At the time, I think West Virginia would be a top 5 team. Not anymore, as an unranked but receiving votes Pittsburgh topples the Mountaineers. With 2 losses, it puts West Virginia near the bottom of the top 10. It does leave Rich Rod's squad at the top of the conference polls, especially with an overtime win over Cincinnati. Despite not reaching the same highs as a national championship in the 2007 season, Mountaineers put together a solid 11-1 regular season with a Big East championship in 2008. That earns Rich Rod's Mountaineers an Orange Bowl bid against the number 21 Virginia Tech, which would be a close game. But based on how Tyrod Taylor and the Hokies beat down Cincinnati in real life, I think Virginia Tech comes out on top here. So that leaves Rich Rod's Mountaineers an 11-2 season and a Big East title in 2008. Not too shabby, right? I mean, it's not the ideal way to send off the seniors, but still a lot for a Big East team like West Virginia. Except, could this new crop of talent coming in keep the ball rolling? Once again, we survey the West Virginia roster. Much of the talent has moved on, like Pat White, Pat McAfee, Steve Slayton, Owen Schmidt, and others. But there's a few names on the roster you might still recognize. Hey, Noel Devine's back. A freshman Stedman Bailey is here. Jack Sanders is the top receiver. Jarrett Brown, White's longtime backup, is the quarterback. The new guard is also here. For one, in real life, Bill Stewart was able to sign one of the most electric players in college football history. You know the one. That's right. Tavon Austin has arrived, and you bet Rich Rodriguez would have been all over the kid if he's in Morgantown. So now Tavon is a vital cog in the Rodriguez zone read scheme. This is an alternate history after all, and it's time to flex that timeline. Because Bill Stewart signed his guy in the 2008 class in quarterback Geno Smith. You know, the guy that threw a bazillion yards to Tavon Austin. But Geno isn't a Rich Rod guy. He had his eyes set on a much higher prize. You see, Rich Rodriguez was hot on the trail of a star prospect in Jeannette High School in the Pittsburgh suburbs. This kid was different, transcendent, a star in the making. The 5-star was a pro-ready 6'6" with a cannon arm and track player speed. He delayed his signing day until after he helped his high school Jayhawks win the state basketball championship. Of course, we're talking about Terrell Pryor. This isn't some pipe dream drawn up to forward this alternate history scenario. Rodriguez is heavily interested in Pryor, and Pryor in Rodriguez and his zone read system. In our timeline, Pryor kicked West Virginia to the curb in his finalists list when Rodriguez bolted for Ann Arbor in the maize and blue, adding Michigan in their place. In this new alternate timeline, Pryor doesn't have to play the cat and mouse game he did with Ryan Mallett, another highly touted quarterback who sat behind Chad Henne at Michigan and was rearing to take over the program when Coach Rod arrived. Instead, Pryor is the guy. Oh, and did I mention he was in the 2007 recruiting class? This is the biggest divergence from our timeline, so I'm going to take a little bit longer here. Why would Pryor choose West Virginia over a blue blood like Ohio State? After all, he didn't pick Rich Rod in Michigan in real life. Well, for one, there was Ryan Mallett at Michigan ready to go. West Virginia doesn't have that path, just a season behind Pat White, who plays a strikingly similar game to Pryor. In this timeline also, Rodriguez has the bona fides, a national championship from the Mountaineers in 2007 on the back of this Backyard Brawl win that starts this whole butterfly effect. Over fellow finalist Ohio State at that. That should be enough to sway Pryor to join the Mountaineers. Pryor commits to Rich Rod and the Mountaineers, mostly sitting for the 2008 season behind senior Pat White, but he does get action in specific packages and mop-up time. In 2009, though, it's a different story. Pryor's a sophomore ready to be unleashed on the world in Rodriguez's zone read scheme. Remember all those players? Noel Devine, Jock Standers, Stedman Bailey, Tavon Austin? Imagine them in Rodriguez's scheme, with Terrell Pryor under center. Well, not directly under center, because of the shotgun looks. Either way, 2009 is a coming out party of sorts. Pryor, now a sophomore, was ready to take the reins over from White and take the Mountaineers to new heights. In the previous timeline, the 2008 Mountaineers finished the regular season at 9-3, a respectable mark in their first post-Pat White season. How does that look with Terrell Pryor quarterback instead of Jarrett Brown, who would remain the backup for his senior season? We can't really compare stats since the trestle scheme Pryor ran at Ohio State was much more pro-style focused than West Virginia's Rich Rod zone read. But even in that vacuum, Pryor outplayed Brown in 2009. We can assume that the dynamic combination of Pryor and Devine would absolutely be the best offense Rodriguez marched into Milan Pusker Stadium, and with the hype around that pairing and last season's Big East championship, you bet the Mountaineers would have started the season ranked unlike in the real timeline. I'd notch West Virginia as a team in the 20 to 25 range due to the uncertainty of the move from White to Pryor, but they quickly start climbing. Just like in the real timeline, West Virginia would rip off 2 quick wins, but fall on the road to Auburn. It would be a close game, but the raucous Auburn crowd would be too much for Pryor in his first big-time action. Then, 4 straight wins put the Mountaineers at number 20 in the AP poll and 6-1, with a battle against fellow 6-2 program in the Big East, South Florida. Because the Bulls took the game so handedly in our real timeline, I think the result stands here, and USF gets a solid top 25 win. But I expect the game to be a lot closer than the real life's 30-19 result, with the West Virginia running game invigorated by Pryor and Devine. At 6-3, the Mountaineers fall out of the top 25 polls, but a win against Louisville sets up a battle against Cincinnati. Except these aren't the number 5 Bearcats you see in real life. Instead, it's the Kevin Sumlin coach Cincinnati that's still very good, but ranked in the 17-20 range instead of top 5. No matter. Pryor and Devine annihilate the Bearcats for a major win. West Virginia re-enters the rankings at number 24 for a ranked backyard brawl against number 8 Pittsburgh. And just like in real life, West Virginia claims revenge against Pitt with a 19-16 win. 2009 comes to a close with West Virginia sitting at 10-2 in the regular season and 5-2 in Big East Conference play. Believe it or not, the win over Pitt earns the Mountaineers, who are climbing into the top 15 after 2 straight ranked wins, including a top 10 win over Pitt, yet another Big East championship. I'd assume Cincinnati would lose another conference game, and West Virginia would hold the tiebreaker over both them and Pitt with head-to-head wins. That puts West Virginia in the Sugar Bowl against number 5 Florida. Just like against Auburn, I think the Mountaineers are just a little outmatched here, but it's a lot closer than the 51-24 drubbing Florida put over Cincinnati on a real timeline. Let's say more of a 42-34 barn burner, but Florida pulls away at the end. For those counting, our alternate history has landed us up with these results for West Virginia. 2007, 12-1, Big East champions, national champions. 2008, 11-2, Big East champions, and a loss in the Orange Bowl. In 2009, 10-3, Big East champions, and a loss in the Sugar Bowl. Somehow 10-3 and a Big East championship feels just like a little bit of a letdown. You think you get more from Terrell Pryor and this offense than just that? But 2010, that's where it gets interesting. Especially so since Noel Devine is back for his senior season, and freshman and sophomore phenoms like Pryor, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey all have a full season under their belts and enter as a junior, sophomore, and sophomore respectively. The Mountaineers opened the year ranked 19th after a narrow Sugar Bowl loss to a top 5 Florida program. They rattled off 3 easy non-conference wins over then FCS Coastal Carolina, Marshall, and Maryland. But then, they announced their intentions to the world. Rich Rod, Pryor, Tavon, and Devine head down to Baton Rouge to Tiger Stadium and face LSU. It's a top 20 matchup with West Virginia up to number 17 and the home Tigers holding number 15 slot. In our timeline, in real life, the Mountaineer offense was largely ineffective, only mustering 2 scores, 177 total yards. Not now, though. West Virginia comes out with their hair on fire and Terrell Pryor torches the LSU defense. It's a rout, and everything's coming up West Virginia. That includes their ranking, which jumps to 11, just outside the top 10. With the relatively light schedule and overall light year for the Big East, it's hard to imagine this iteration of West Virginia slipping up, especially with their real-life losses coming to LSU and Baton Rouge and 8-5 Big East foes UConn and Syracuse. This team in our alternate timeline doesn't suffer the same fate and dazzles on their way to a perfect 12-0 season and a Big East championship. And that sets up quite the conundrum atop the nation's polls. There are now 4 12-0 conference champions beckoning for a national title shot. West Virginia is one, as is the Andy Dalton-led TCU, Darren Thomas's Oregon, and the Cam Newton Auburn Tigers. How would the BCS even sort this out? I'd imagine TCU, being a Mountain West school, would clearly be in the 4th spot. I'd also imagine Auburn will once again claim the top spot behind the electric ear of Cam Newton. That leaves us with Oregon or West Virginia. The Ducks held the top slot in the BCS rankings for 5 weeks before the SEC champion Tigers bounced them to second for a national title matchup. There's 3 top 25 wins to Oregon's resume in 2010. West Virginia, on the other hand, just has the 1 win in Death Valley. With both teams' counting numbers incredibly impressive, though, I don't see how West Virginia gets the nod here over Oregon. In that case, the 2010 BCS championship is unchanged. Cam Newton dominates Oregon and cements his place in the annals of college football. West Virginia would head out west to Pasadena, California in the Rose Bowl game against number 5 Wisconsin. Mountaineers cruise past the Badgers, claiming a Rose Bowl win and a perfect 13-0 record. Maybe they even hang a claimed national championship banner. And with only Noel Devine running out of eligibility among the key pieces for the Mountaineers, the future's looking bright in Morgantown. Well, bright if you decide to keep your eyes on the field instead of off of it. December 23rd, 2010. The NCAA Committee on Infractions holds a press conference to announce some damning transgressions. A plane visit to a tattoo parlor near campus has become a national storyline. In our timeline, in real life, this happens at Ohio State. But that's not the case here, as the ringleader of the scheme isn't in Columbus. He's in Morgantown. The NCAA catches a whiff of impropriety from Terrell Pryor about selling his Big East championship rings and accepting inadmissible benefits from a Morgantown tattoo parlor. I'd assume, like at Ohio State, a few other teammates are going to be involved in this. We won't mention who because this is a hypothetical, and there's no way of knowing who would be involved with it. But let's go with the idea of 4 other Mountaineer starters being involved alongside Pryor, just like with Ohio State. And just like at Ohio State, the NCAA Committee on Infractions suspends the athletes for the first 5 games of 2011 and orders the players to pay back what they earned from selling the merchandise and the impermissible benefits. In this case, Pryor and the other offending players would be suspended for games against Marshall, FCS Norfolk State, at Maryland, at home against LSU, and at home against Bowling Green. Looking back at this scandal in hindsight, it doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. So what if the players got cheaper tattoos? So what if they sold their rings or jerseys or autographs? They should be able to do that and earn profit off their names and on-field performance. And thankfully they can now. With NIL and everything like that, the path to accepting money and accepting funds in terms of on-field performance is clearer. But that wasn't the case in 2010. The college football athletics world was vastly different than the one you see now. Tattoo-gate was the biggest scandal in the 2000s before Jerry Sandusky's news threw Penn State into turmoil. College football fans largely still believed and valued the amateurism aspect of college athletics and saw the players as student athletes instead of just athletes. That context is important, but things get worse. Pryor, with 2 seasons of starting experience, 2 Big East championships, and a Rose Bowl win, declares for the NFL draft rather than deal with some silly sanctions. He's a bona fide star in the college ranks, likely receiving Heisman attention in 2010. He does get drafted, but probably a little higher than he did in real life. But now without Pryor, the West Virginia program is facing down the barrel of a gun, one that's ready to go off at a moment's notice. When the scandal broke in Columbus, it actually got much, much worse than just the suspensions for players. It turned out that Ohio State hero coach Jim Tressel knew about the allegations and swept them under the rug. With the NCAA breathing down his neck, Tressel elected to resign from his post as Ohio State's head coach. Then, the NCAA pulled the rug from Ohio State and forced them to vacate all of their 2010 wins. What would Rodriguez do in this situation? I'd say Rich Rod has even more to lose than Tressel, which is a point for the cover-up bucket. But Ohio State is one of the sport's bluest of bloods. They can recover for something like this simply with time in being Ohio State. The same isn't true in Morgantown, where an upstart program is trying to prove they belong. And as much as it sucks to say it, I think a similar thing would happen in West Virginia at Ohio State. Rodriguez would be shown the door. The program will be thrust into disarray. With Pryor, the face of the program, off to the NFL and program architect Rodriguez gone, what does West Virginia have left to show? "2011 has really lost its luster, hasn't it? With Rodriguez leaving so late in the cycle in March, I'd assume we get a similar interim head coach situation as at Ohio State. My guess, based on Rodriguez leaving in the real timeline in 2007, Bill Stewart would take over. But Stewart doesn't have the talent or pull that Rodriguez had. With NCAA sanctions serving as a damper on any major momentum, the Mountaineer program would flounder, even more so when the net tightens and the Big East folds football in 2014. Where does West Virginia end up in that? Pittsburgh and Syracuse defected to the ACC in September 2011, right after the sanctions were thrown on the Mountaineers. TCU pulled out of their impending membership before that. The writing was on the wall. Louisville, Cincinnati, UConn, South Florida, and Rutgers were flirting with other conferences. Just like when the Pac-12 went up in flames a few years ago, the Big East Football Conference was now a fire sale. West Virginia was also courting offers. In our timeline, the Mountaineers were famously spurned by both the ACC and SEC, settling on the Big 12 with much chagrin from their donor and fan bases. In this new timeline, the Mountaineers are a very interesting case study. For one, they're more successful with 5 consecutive Big East championships, a 2007 BCS National Championship, and 3 more New Year's Six appearances, including a win in the most recent Rose Bowl. They're a good program, the best that the Big East has to offer in football, and has a burgeoning basketball team. On the other hand, Mountaineers were just gut-punched by a massive NCAA scandal that sent their star player to the NFL and their head coach to the television set. With suspensions and a completely void 2010 season, who would take a chance on the Mountaineers? I think it's fair to say West Virginia, even with those bona fides, still gets denied by the largest powers that be, the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC. That leaves them right where they were in real life, Group of 5 status, or the Big 12. At the time, the Big 12, by its own rates, wasn't looking any good. With Texas A&M and Missouri off to the SEC, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State applying for Pac-12 membership, and Texas desperately trying to find a conference home to accommodate their new Longhorn network. But TCU, who was set to join the Big East, is an obvious grab, and they joined the Big 12 like it happened in real life. But West Virginia? By all reports, the Big 12 was only adding one school alongside TCU. That was going to be either West Virginia or Louisville. Even in our timeline, the conference got cold feet about the Mountaineers and pivoted to Louisville last second. Eventually, they settled on the Mountaineers, and West Virginia joined the Big 12, and Louisville was relegated to stay in the Big East. But with all these NCAA sanctions, violations, and a cloud around Morgantown, this new timeline sees the Big 12 stay with Louisville instead of West Virginia. And that's not so far-fetched. It's really a comparison between football and basketball. West Virginia was a growing power on the hardwood, but football was their draw and now their curse. Louisville, though, was enjoying 5 consecutive men's NCAA basketball tournament appearances under Rick Pitino and continuously advancing multiple rounds, although they wouldn't fully break through until their 2012-2013 national championship run. And more importantly, there's no hint at NCAA impropriety on the Louisville campus. The Big 12 decides to go with Louisville, leaving West Virginia out to dry. At this point, we can basically swap the two schools in their realignment paths, with West Virginia landing as a founding member of the American Athletic Conference. They're only a member with a national championship in football since Y2K. Past that, it just gets hard to predict what happens. There's so many variables that we won't be able to sort through. So let's just leave it here. A 2007 national championship lands West Virginia in the American instead of at a Power 5 level. It was a great run with some electric and exciting players. But wait, what about the other butterfly effects? How do other schools fare? Cincinnati doesn't see their Big East success with Brian Kelly continue as Kevin Sumlin struggles for a bit. He's fired in 2012, and Tommy Tuberville took over as the Bearcats joined the Mountaineers in the American Athletic Conference. The Tuberville tenure leading into Luke Fickell largely remains the same. Louisville gets more football momentum as they join the Big 12, but don't claim any conference crowns. Still, the Lamar Jackson era is much more electric as the wild defenses down in the Big 12 struggle to stop him. The Cardinals become the next West Virginia of sorts, a must-watch offense headlined by an elite quarterback, but the team just can't get over the hump. LSU struggled at the onset of the Brian Kelly hire, and he's eventually dumped after 3 seasons. With Kelly gone for the 2010-11 cycle, the Tigers try to do the best they can with a rough hand, signing a pact with James Franklin, offensive coordinator at Kansas State. Franklin's move to Baton Rouge would coincide with the start of his real-life Vanderbilt tenure, and it takes some time, but Franklin builds LSU into a solid program. They routinely win 10 games and compete for a few SEC titles, but aren't able to break through. Ohio State is the real domino here. Without the signing of Terrell Pryor, the Buckeyes continue on their path of Craig Krenzel and Todd Beckman with Troy Smith tossed in every so often. Without Tattoogate, Jim Tressel is able to be a lifer at Ohio State, retiring ahead of the 2023 season. The Buckeyes, however, never went through the Urban Meyer revolution. The revitalization we saw from Meyer never happens, and Ohio State program never tries to keep up with the growing SEC powers. There's a great battle between Tressel and Michigan's Jim Harbaugh that goes back to the Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler era, and encapsulate everything great about Big Ten football. The Buckeyes likely win another national championship at some point, but they're not the power-hungry dynasty we've seen under Meyer and Ryan Day. I'd say they're more akin to Penn State under James Franklin. If Urban Meyer doesn't take the Ohio State job, where does he go, though? Let's assume that he wants to return to the sidelines in the 2011-2012 offseason, like he did in real life. The biggest jobs available would be at post-scandal Penn State, Texas A&M, and North Carolina. Considering Meyer's willingness to take over after Tattoogate and Penn State's historical power given to head coach Joe Paterno, could the Nittany Lions lure Meyer out of retirement? It may not be a fit for the Ohio-born Meyer, but that didn't stop him in places like Utah and Florida. But for debate's sake, let's say that one's not right, and Meyer waits another year to rejoin the fray in the 2012 coaching carousel. SEC jobs like Tennessee and Auburn could be a better draw. Up north, Wisconsin's probably the best fit, but looking at these jobs in the vacuum, get ready Iron Bowl fans. Coach Meyer is coming to Auburn to go head-to-head with Nick Saban. As for Rich Rod, he can likely get another job, likely following his same path. FCS Jacksonville State would tab him as the transition head coach for the move to FBS after some time on TV, and he'd do great. But the reunion we just saw in Morgantown this offseason would never happen. Not after bringing the NCAA down on the Mountaineers and relegating them to has-beens that had one good run. And from there, the butterfly stops. Its movements are beyond our view. It's a lot of changes for one simple game, though. We could go so far as to say our timeline was decided by that faithful 13-9 game in chilly Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because this new timeline certainly lends credence to complete SEC domination. Thank you for listening to the first episode in the Historical Portal series on the SID Sports Network. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Leave some comments on what you think is the most interesting thing, and if you think history would have played out differently in here. There is going to be more videos coming in this series. You can head over to sid-sports.com and take a look at our Historical Portal page hub. On there, you'll see the rest of all the topics, as well as written out versions of the stories, and an opportunity to vote on a special reader-selected season closing opportunity. If you did like the video, again, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and feel free to subscribe at sid-sports.com for more content, such as Historical Portal, as well as other on-field and off-field stories.